we've been studying the life of David, King David, the imperfect king, for about 2 months now. We come to week 9, I think, on King David. We have 2 sermons left, including this one, so 1 more sermon to go. So today we're gonna look at King David's love for Mephibosheth, as we have read in 2 Samuel chapter 9. We're gonna go straight in, all right? Remember, by this time, David is king in Israel. Both Saul, the previous king, and his son Jonathan are dead at this time. And we are about to see about David, the life of David, that is perhaps, we could say, David at its best. David at his best. Back in 1 Samuel chapter 13, when God rejected King Saul, Samuel said this. So it's on the screen. Samuel said this, 1 Samuel 13:14 says this. But now your kingdom shall not continue. This is when God rejected Saul, okay? The Lord has sought out a man. So Saul has been rejected by God, and God says through Samuel, the Lord has sought a man after his own heart. And the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. You see, this is what God was saying to Saul when he rejected Saul, saying, what comes next will be the one who is after my own heart. And this is David. And last 2 weeks, we look at David and his failed marriages, and David and Bathsheba. They're not pretty. They're probably David at his worst. But today we're going to look at David at his best. So let's jump straight in. The man after God's own heart. 3 things we're going to look at. First, what did David do? Second, whom did David do it for? And finally, how did David do it? In context of David being the man after God's own heart, right? So if you want to be the man after God's own heart, what should you do? Basically, that's what we're going to ask, right? Because this is, God says to David, not anyone saying about David. It's God, the Lord says about David, that this person here, King David, is the man after my own heart. So we want to look at, what did he do that God says this is the man after my own heart? Okay? So what did David do? What did the man after God's own heart do? 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1. And David said, is there still anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? By this time, Saul and Jonathan are dead. And David is king, reigning king in Israel. And he asks people, is there still anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? The word kindness here in English is kind of weak. Show him kindness. That is weak because this is one of the strongest word in Hebrew. It's hesed. It's hesed. Hesed is not just any love, it's covenant love. Love that cannot be broken. So basically David say, is there anyone left in the house of Saul so that I may show hesed to him or to her? So what does it mean? What does hesed, what does this strong word that our English translation says, kindness, what does it mean? Let me explain what it doesn't mean so that we can understand what it means. So let me say that first, okay? What does it look like when you don't have it, when you don't have hesed? Okay, what does hesed does not mean? One of the most difficult things for us today, this generation, especially the younger generation, one of the most difficult things for us to do is commitment. Young people, you might disagree with me, but let me tell you, compared to your parents and to your grandparents and the previous generation, young generation, your problem is commitment. Okay? Let me give you a couple of examples. From baby boomers generation, likely your dad generation, to Gen X, that's my generation, and to young generation, millennials, Gen Y, and all those new generation, when it comes to employment, we can see a trend that goes from a lifetime of employment to that's at a single organization, with a single company. They will start the job there and they will die and retire with the same job. That's baby boomers. To today, to 2 to 3 years maximum employment at a single company. Some people that I hired previously before I became full-time pastor even plan where they want to go before they started their job. Where they plan to go, they say, okay, I'm going to do this job. I'm going to take this job only for 2 years. Then I'm going to move to New York. They already planned the next job before they started the job. So that's, the issue there is, I don't want to commit to this. This is, I just want to give probably 2 years if it works out. See, 2 years is a long time. Some people do it for a year and they say, see you later, I'm moving on. But that's not always the case. You look at your parents' generation and your parents' parents' generation. That's not the case. All right? So the issue there is commitment. And second thing, in marriage, commitment in marriage. That's another thing. In Australia, I looked this up. Since 1970, the crude marriage rate, this is the rate, the percentage, the crude marriage rate has been steadily declining from about 10% per 1,000 people in Australia in 1970 to about 4 per 1,000. This is for the span of 50 years. From 10 per 1,000 to 4 per 1,000 marriage. People do not want to commit into marriage these days. They're reluctant to commit to marriage. Well, if they decided to commit to marriage today, right, those that decided to get married, the number of people living together, men and women, prior to their marriage has increased. So they want a trial first. They want to test it out first. Is this working out? Before they committed to marriage, they say, we're going to try it first. So that has increased. In 1975, there's 16% of those who get married who stay together, live together, 16 in 1975 before they get married. Today, 2 years ago, it's 81% in Australia. 8 out of 10 marriages in Australia 2 years ago, they already stay and live together before they committed to marriage. What's the issue there? Commitment. And in churches today as well. I mean, we can't just talk about people out there and not talk about us Christians. What happened to us when it comes to commitment in churches? Well, Christians have shown also to be less likely today, in today's generation, to commit than previous generations. Previous generation, you will see your parents and grandparents committed to a church. Today's generation, it's very different. Many today prefer to loosely committed to a church, to a particular church. So what they do, there's a term called church shopping. The attitude is rather than, I'm part of the church to serve, now the attitude is, I'm part of the church to consume. If the products that are being sold is not what I like, then I will not come. That's a consumer attitude. All those examples are not the picture, are the opposite of picture of hesed, a committed covenant love. Okay? So when it comes to church, then what it means is it's difficult today for a younger generation to lead a small group, to commit to a small group. Approaching an older people, say, can you help us to church lead a small group? It's a lot easier than to get a younger generation to do it. Why? Because by taking that responsibility, then one evening a week, it's out. And young people don't like that. They don't like that commitment. They say, I can't lock in, Tuesday evening or Wednesday evening for the rest of the year. What about if something better comes up? What about if my friend asks me for, something, or, take me out for something, So they want to keep it open. They want to keep it open. It's hard for them to commit. They want to look out for a better invitation. A lot of times, older generation would have planned everything. Like you ask them, what are you doing this weekend? They know. Or next weekend, they know. Young people, you ask the day before, they don't know. They want to keep it open. If 5 offers come in, they pick the best one. It's like sports, dine out number 2, picnic, this. All right, I like this better. I'll choose this one. They want to keep it open. They do not want to commit. Okay? So those examples are not hesed. Okay? Those examples are not hesed. So let me ask this for us this morning. Are you afraid of commitment? So that's what I want to address. Because if you want to understand hesed, we want to understand David, a man after God's own heart. We need to understand this. We need to understand hesed. We need to understand covenant love. So ask yourself this morning, do I have a problem? Am I fear of making commitment? And let me give us an example. I'll give you a clue as to why we may be afraid of commitment. One main reason is because we want freedom. The reason we are afraid of commitment of any sort is because we want freedom. We're afraid if we commit to something, then our freedom is being restricted, or our freedom in that particular thing being taken away from us. People are afraid to commit to marriage because they're afraid someone's better might come along. Right? The freedom to change to another person, to another spouse. We don't want that. We don't want that. And if we are honest with ourselves, oftentimes we prefer to consume, passive consumer, than to commit and to be involved in anything. So that's why younger generation are really good in commenting. So just look at social media. A lot of people comment and critics, not many doers. Critics do not need to be involved. They can criticize here, criticize there, and they move on. We want to be a good consumer. How we do our research, how we can consume better. See, young generations are really good at this. If you want to buy anything or get anything, before you do that, ask your children. They would know everything about it. If they don't, they'll find out for you. They're good at this. They're wired. They are wired for this. If you have good products to offer, they'll buy it. You say, if you're afraid of commitment, this is basically what you do. Give me good products, I'll buy it. If the product is no longer good for me, I'll move on. No commitment, I'll move on. When it comes to mobile phones contract, they don't like that. They like month-to-month plan. As soon as I don't like your offer anymore, I jump ship to another one. They don't like 2 years contract. That's too long. That's a lifetime for young people. Your parents, 12 months contract, done. They'll sign quickly. The thing is, our fear of commitment, our desire for freedom has limited and have become our slave, have enslaved us in not just in particular thing, but in all aspects of our lives. Before you know it, every aspect of your life gonna be measured or gonna be planned based on this principle. You're gonna decide things in your life based on this principle. Am I committing too much here? Am I restricting my freedom by doing this? Then you start measuring by that. Is this a good product for me? In everything, that become your lens that you look at your world. But the man after God's own heart, David, that's not how he operates. That's not how David operates. That's not the posture of David's heart. Let's look at verse 3, chapter 9, verse 3. 2 Samuel, chapter 9, verse 3. And the king said, is there not still someone of the house of Saul that I may show the kindness, again that word hesed, the the kindness of God to him. Ziba said to the king, "There's still a son of Jonathan. He's crippled in his feet." See, David take it even a step further. In verse 1, he said, that I might show kindness to him. Now he said, that I may show the kindness of God to him. He takes it a step further, not just any hesed, it's God's hesed to him. By desiring freedom, we have running away from commitment. If you desire freedom too much, you run away from commitment, and then sooner or later you'll come full circle and you become a slave to freedom. You started with wanting freedom, you're running away from commitment. Before you know it, you'll come full circle and you become enslaved to freedom. What do I mean by that? What I mean is this. If you want to escape freedom, what you'll end up is, if you fear commitment and you want freedom, what you'll end up is, freedom become your slave master. You become the slave to freedom. Everything that you seek for is based on freedom. Does this give me freedom? Does this lock me in? That become your master and become enslaved by freedom. We become afraid to give our everything in anything. We don't want to jump in anymore. We just tiptoeing. We put one foot in and one foot out. So what happened is we never be able to give our best because we always want to reserve something just in case. Because we want freedom. We don't want to commit. And we become restricted as a result, you see. We become restricted. It is only when we commit. It is only when we commit, when we throw ourselves in, all in, and embrace God's hesed that we experience true freedom. Freedom to be able to give our everything, freedom to not be restricted, and to wait for the next best thing to come along. So when you work, you can't give your best because you already planned for the next job. You already planned for the next job. Everything that you do, you always think the next one, the next one, the next one. You can't give everything in because you want freedom. You don't want to be locked in. You don't want commitment. See, by embracing this, by embracing commitment, you can give your everything. You can give your everything and not be restricted. So that's what David do. He extend not only hesed, but also God's hesed. So whom did David do it for? Whom did David extend this God's hesed for? See, before we read verse 4 to 8, let me say, David didn't extend hesed to his best friend. No. You may read that way, to Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son. You may read as if, well, Jonathan is David's best friend. So David's actually extending his hesed to his best friend. Easy, not hard. Well, not really. Remember, David's king now. He didn't extend his hesed to his best friend. David extended hesed to Mephibosheth, Saul's descendant, a threat to the throne. Let's read from verse 4. And King David, the king, said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "He's in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lo-debar." Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lo-debar. And Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and paid homage. And David said, "Mephibosheth." And he answered, "Behold, I'm your servant." And David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will show you kindness, hesed, for the sake of your father, Jonathan. And I will restore to you all the land of Saul, your father, and you shall eat at my table always." And he paid homage and said, "What is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I?" Mephibosheth know for sure when King David called him up, summoned him that his life is in danger. Because as a king in those days, any descendant of previous monarch is a threat. If you want security, if you want promise of peace, assurance of peace, you should utterly annihilate any descendants of the previous monarch. And Mephibosheth knows that. That's why he was afraid. When he came and see David, what did he do? He fell on his face and paid homage. And what did David say? Do not fear. Why did he say that? Why did he say do not fear? Because there's a lot of fear. He was probably trembling. He said, I'm dead, dog. I'm going to be executed. I'm as good as dead. He found me. The king found me. See, you may say to me though, well, Mephibosheth's crippled at both feet. Come on, what can he do? Right? He cannot do a thing to challenge David. Well, you're mistaken, because in those days, it's not about what you're able to do, but it's about your blood, your tribe. He's a tribe of Benjamin, the grandson of Saul, the son of Jonathan. The people, the tribe of Benjamin, can round out and rally around Mephibosheth and challenge David. They could do that. And they've done that with Ishbosheth before. So, he's thinking, I've been summoned by king, I could be executed. So let me just come and surrender myself. He's fallen flat, face down before the king. And the king say, do not be afraid. At this point, some commentators observe how difficult must it be for someone like Mephibosheth to fall flat on their face and pay homage to a king. For us, it's easy. We got 2 feet. We are able people. But for Mephibosheth, who are crippled, that is not an easy feat to do. It's a difficult thing for him to do. Now, what David did for Mephibosheth to extend God's kindness, God's hesed, is David at his best. David, who is the man of God's own heart, when he say to Mephibosheth, the enemy, do not fear, for I will show kindness, or I will show hesed for the sake of your father, Jonathan. Do you see what's happening here? How can David do such a thing? You see? This is a difficult thing. For us, if we distance ourselves from the story, we just read it, yeah, it's a nice story. But if you immerse yourself in this position, you will see this is a difficult thing to do. Not anybody can do this. But how can he do it? How can David do such a thing? See, the more we seek after freedom in our own ways, by avoiding commitment after commitment, the more we are being enslaved. That's not what David did. But for David, he can extend hesed to his enemy because he's not afraid of commitment. He's not afraid of commitment. He's not afraid to put all that he has in one basket. If Mephibosheth is the down, if Mephibosheth will gonna dethrone me, let it be. So I'm gonna show kindness to Mephibosheth. Let's continue reading from verse 9 to 10. Then the king called Ziba. So after David said that, he said the king called Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, all that belonged to Saul, now he's the king. Saul and Jonathan's dead. He owns all that, King Saul and Jonathan, that belonged to Saul and Jonathan. He said this, all that belonged to Saul and to all his house, I have given to your master's grandson. I have given to Mephibosheth. And you and your sons and your servant shall till the land for him and shall bring in the produce that your master's grandson may have bread to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. The only way to gain freedom is to give it up. is to not seek freedom, but to give up freedom. If you want to have true freedom, do not be afraid with commitment. Finally, how did David do it? So how did David do it? What gave him strength? What enables David to do this? If we are a generation that is afraid of commitment, we seek freedom after freedom, and we saw David to just give God's kindness, hesed, let's learn from him. How did he do it? What enabled? What gave him strength and ability to do that? So for us to understand this one, we must go back a little bit, okay? We need to look at the covenant that David made between himself and Jonathan, Mephibosheth's father. So let's turn to 1 Samuel 18, it'll be on the screen. Verse 3 and 4. 1 Samuel 18, 3-4. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. This is the heir. King Saul still reigning. David is nobody. Jonathan is the king's son, the heir to the throne. He gave David his robe, basically give David the heirship, the kingship, the robe. And even that, he gave his armor and his sword. He's vulnerable. He said, like, now you can kill me. He's vulnerable before David. And that's what happened long before Mephibosheth came along. And do you remember the last time Jonathan and David actually saw each other, the last conversation that they had? Let's turn to 1 Samuel 20, verse 42. This is the last conversation between Mephibosheth's father, Jonathan, and David. Jonathan said to David, again, David's on the run. Saul is seeking to kill David. Jonathan's still the king's son. Jonathan said to David, go in peace, because we have sworn, both of us, in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring. How long? Forever. And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. That was the last time these two best friends saw each other. So before David became king, King Saul continually seeking to kill David. And in those days, some commentators believe this, and I do believe this, if it wasn't for Jonathan, David would have been killed by Saul. It's because of Jonathan's kindness, David's life was spared, and now he's the king. Now he's sitting at the throne. Because of David experienced Jonathan Hesed, now David can extend Hesed to Mephibosheth. David could do what he did to Mephibosheth because David himself has tasted it. He has experienced it. From whom? From Jonathan. He experienced firsthand what it means to be the receiving end of Hesed. It is only human wanting to have security in life. We all want security in life, don't we? We all want security in life. Perhaps Australians more than others know this better. All right? And we are a nation that is obsessed with one thing, apart from sport, home ownership. Home ownership equals to security. We want to have security. We strive for that security. We do all we can to achieve that security. It's only human to do that. Nothing wrong with that. But that's being human. We want security in life. And our lifestyle shows that the more we keep for ourselves, the better. Because we're striving for security, right? We keep for ourselves more than we give away to others. Why? Because we're striving for security. For whom? For us. For myself. That is why we sometimes, or oftentimes, including myself, often have negative suspicions when someone shares about their needs. Have you had friends or relatives or people around you that share about their needs to you? Do you often have negative suspicion when that happens? When they share their needs to you? Do you think to yourself like, well, he's after my money, or he's after my donation, he's after what I can give him, that's why he's telling me all this? There's this kind of fear in us. Why? Because we want to look out for ourselves. We want security for ourselves. And our lifestyle shows it. Our behavior shows it. See, Jesus showed us that in order for us to be secure, to be truly secure, is to not keeping for yourself, but to relinquish. The only way you can feel truly secure in your life is to not keep hoarding and keeping for yourself, but to be generous with others. And I've experienced this myself. When it comes to security, sense of assurance and security and happiness and joy, it's not when I hoard to myself. It's when I'm being generous to others. Because God has wired us that way. The more we relinquish our freedom, give away our freedom by committing, by being generous, the more we receive security, the more we receive freedom to do everything that we want to do and not be restricted and be enslaved by our desire for freedom. You see, when someone becomes Christians, this is what should happen. Jesus should become king over that person's life, become Lord over that person's life. Correct? That's what being a Christian means. Christ our King, Christ our Lord. That means He rules our life, He's over our lives. Not just one part of our life, all of our lives. But a lot of us, sometimes when we become Christian, we say, Lord, you can be King and Lord over my study, over my family, over my business, over my work. But when it comes to my finances, let me be king and master over it. Let me be the one who have a say in this. Not you, but me. And that's quite common because we seek after security. When what Jonathan showed David is, I don't care about security. I've made covenant with you, David. Here's my rope. Here's my sword. If you want to kill me now, you can. David experienced that. Truly lived it. And his life is a testimony that the fact that David is living, he said like, this is because of Jonathan. Now he's showing it to Mephibosheth, bringing the enemy to his table. Mephibosheth daily eating with the king and his sons. That is a privilege. He can do it because he experienced it through Jonathan. When we chase after freedom and security, we will lose the very thing that we run after. Let me say that again. When we chase after freedom and security, we will lose the very thing that we run after. That is freedom and security. Only when we give it up, we say, Lord, you are King, you are Lord over my life, over everything. Only when that happens, when you relinquish them, that we truly gain freedom and security in our lives. That's when you can truly sleep peacefully at night, every night, knowing I've given everything to the Lord. He's the Lord and King over my lives. If I wake up tomorrow, it's because of His mercy and grace. If I have a job tomorrow, if I have food before me at my table tomorrow, that's because of His goodness for me. But again, you may be saying to me right now, well, that's okay for David because he had Jonathan. That's why David is so generous to Mephibosheth, because he had Jonathan. How about me? I've got no Jonathan. If you look at my life, I've lived a difficult life. I get to where I am today because of me. I've got no Jonathan in my life to show me Hesed. That is why I cannot extend Hesed to others, because I have never experienced Jonathan or have a friend like Jonathan in my life. That's a fair comment, because not every one of us have the privilege to have a friend like Jonathan. But let me read this, verse 11 to 13. Let me finish up and then I'll conclude. Then Ziba, verse 11 to 13. Then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so will your servant do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. And all who lived in Ziba's house became Mephibosheth's servants. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate always at the king's table. Now he was lame in both his feet. Jonathan gave his right to the throne to David, didn't he? When he gave him his robe and the sword. And David, in return, brought Mephibosheth into the palace and ate at the king's table always for the rest of his life. Jonathan risked his life to save David's life. And David in turn restored Mephibosheth's life by adopting him as one of his sons. So Mephibosheth received David Hesed on Jonathan's behalf. Do you see that? Mephibosheth didn't do anything for David, did he? But David did everything for Mephibosheth on behalf of what Jonathan did. Do you see what happened? Because of what Mephibosheth's father did to David, Mephibosheth received all these benefits, you see. So you ask me, I don't have Jonathan. Let me say to you, you have Jonathan in your life. You may not be good in your life. You may not be perfect in your life. You may not have done all the right things in your life, but you have Jonathan in your life who have done everything right on your behalf. And you can and am receiving the benefits of what the Jonathans in your life have done for you right now. All the security and all the freedom that you could ever dream of. And that Jonathan in your life and in my life, his name is Jesus. Let me say this. Jonathan gave his right to the throne for David. What did Jesus do? Jesus left his throne for you and I. The throne of heaven became man. So, not only become any man, Jesus came, left his throne of heaven, became a slave, became a servant. Jesus saw Jonathan. Not only that, like Jonathan risked his life for David, not only Jesus did that, not only risking his life, he actually died on the cross for your sake and for my sake. David was Jonathan's enemy. We know that because David is anointed to be king. Jonathan is the heir, King Saul's son. And as a result, Mephibosheth was a threat to David. But enemies, this is the beauty of this story. And let me close with this. Enemies could become friends when there was a sacrifice. For David and Jonathan, what was the sacrifice? Jonathan has to give him his robe, the throne, and made a covenant. The sacrifice was made. Enemies become friends. And for David and Mephibosheth to become friends, it was because of the sacrifice of Jonathan. For us, rebellious generation against God, from the day of Adam and Eve when they fall in the Garden of Eden, we become enemies of God. We are a rebellious generation. For that to become friends, to be restored, we need a sacrifice. And our sacrifice is Jesus on the cross. Just like David had Jonathan, like Mephibosheth had Jonathan, his father, we have Jesus who sacrificed for us. When we see this, when we can see this, when we believe this, and be transformed by this truth, it's only then we could no longer be afraid of commitment in our lives. We're no longer to give up our own security for the sake of others.